Parents, when did you realize your child's school was failing them? My son's coach ignored his asthma and pushed him to collapse during practice. The principal defended the tough love approach, and they branded my concerns as overprotective. I slipped evidence of neglected medical logs to the school nurse, rallied teammates' parents to storm a district meeting, enlisted a doctor to condemn the coach's methods, and sparked a public outcry that restored my son's safety. Standing proud as the coach was benched and the school tightened its health protocols. Trusting the school with Leo felt like handing over a piece of my heart, especially given his asthma. Since his diagnosis at age 5, managing it had been a constant, careful balancing act. We knew his triggers: intense exertion, cold air, pollen. We knew the warning signs: the slight wheeze, the tightness in his chest, the characteristic cough. We drilled him on using his rescue inhaler, established an action plan with his pediatrician, Dr. Ramirez, and meticulously filed all the necessary paperwork with the school nurse, Mrs. Davison, each year. Leo loved basketball, lived for it, and we wanted him to participate, to be normal, but safety was paramount. His asthma action plan, signed by Dr. Ramirez, clearly outlined limitations, pre-medication protocols before strenuous activity, and emergency steps. We believed the school, the system, the adults in charge would adhere to it. Leo made the 7th grade team. He was ecstatic. The coach, Mr. Carlson, was intense, a former college player with a reputation for demanding practices and pushing his teams hard. At the initial parents' meeting, Carlson spoke about discipline, commitment, mental toughness. He acknowledged the stack of medical forms he received, but assured us safety was a priority, though he emphasized conditioning was key to success. We spoke to him privately afterward, specifically about Leo's asthma, reiterating the action plan details, handing him an extra copy. Carlson listened, nodded curtly, assured us he understood, but his eyes seemed to glaze over slightly, already focused on drills and winning records. A tiny flicker of unease sparked in me, but I pushed it down. He was the coach. Mrs. Davison, the nurse, had the official plan. The system would work. For the first few weeks, things seemed okay. Leo came home tired but happy, full of stories about practice. He used his inhaler before drills as instructed. There were occasional minor wheezes, managed quickly with a puff or two from the inhaler he kept in his bag. I checked in with him daily. Any tightness? Any coughing? He usually shrugged it off. But then the intensity of practices ramped up. Carlson started implementing longer conditioning drills, particularly suicides, grueling sprints back and forth across the court. Leo mentioned Carlson was yelling more, pushing them harder, telling them to push through the pain. One chilly Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was the school. My blood ran cold. It was Mrs. Davison, her voice tight with professional calm but underscored with urgency. Leo had collapsed during practice. He was conscious, breathing, but had required significant intervention. She had administered his emergency nebulizer treatment in her office. He was shaken but stable. Could I come immediately? I broke speed limits getting there. I found Leo pale and quiet on a cot in the nurse's office, Mrs. Davison monitoring his oxygen levels. He looked small, exhausted. He told me, between breaths still slightly shallow, what happened. Carlson had them running endless suicides. Leo started wheezing, signaled for his inhaler. Carlson apparently waved him off, yelling something about mental weakness and gutting it out. Leo tried to keep going, pushing himself, not wanting to be singled out or disappoint the coach. The wheezing worsened rapidly. His chest felt like it was clamped in a vice. Air refused to come in. He stumbled, gasped, and then things went fuzzy before he found himself on the floor. Teammates surrounding him. Carlson finally looking concerned. Someone fetching the nurse. Fury, cold and sharp, washed over me. I thanked Mrs. Davison, who looked genuinely concerned but also slightly constrained, careful in her wording. I helped Leo get dressed, his movements slow, drained. As we walked out, we passed the gym. Practice was still going. Carlson's voice echoing, barking instructions. He didn't even check on Leo. That evening, I called the principal, Mr. Harrison. I explained what happened, calmly but firmly detailing how Carlson had ignored Leo's known medical condition, disregarded the action plan, and pushed him to the point of collapse, potentially endangering his life. Harrison listened, made sympathetic noises, but his tone shifted subtly when I mentioned Carlson by name. He promised to look into it, to have a word with the coach. He used phrases like misunderstanding and intense training environment. He also subtly implied that perhaps Leo needed to build more stamina. The conversation left me deeply unsatisfied, feeling dismissed. The next day, Harrison called back. He'd spoken to Coach Carlson. According to Harrison, Carlson felt terrible about the incident, but explained he was trying to instill mental toughness, pushing the boys to overcome perceived limits. He hadn't realized the severity of Leo's distress until he actually collapsed. Harrison emphasized Carlson's winning record, his dedication. He then steered the conversation towards Leo's conditioning, suggesting maybe he wasn't quite up to the demands of competitive basketball. He finished by saying they considered the matter addressed, chalking it up to a learning experience for both Leo and the coach. He explicitly used the phrase tough love, framing Carlson's negligence as a coaching technique. When I protested, citing the medical plan, the potential danger, Harrison's tone cooled further. He suggested, politely but unmistakably, that perhaps I was being a little overprotective, that middle school sports were demanding, and Leo needed to learn resilience. Overprotective. The word hung in the air after the call ended, stinking of condescension and dismissal. My son, who followed his medical plan diligently, had been pushed into an asthma attack severe enough to cause collapse because his coach ignored clear warnings and medical directives, and the principal was defending it as tough love. My initial fury solidified into cold resolve. This wasn't just about Leo anymore. It was about a systemic failure, a dangerous disregard for student health masked by platitudes about mental toughness. The school wasn't just failing Leo, it was actively endangering him and likely others. My trust, carefully placed, was shattered. If the official channels wouldn't protect my son, I would have to force them to. My first move was reconnaissance, a deliberate shift from concerned parent to determined investigator. I needed concrete proof of negligence, evidence, something tangible to counter the dismissive narrative spun by Harrison and Carlson. Leo's account was compelling, but it was my word against theirs. My mind immediately went to the medical logs kept by the school nurse. Mrs. Davison was legally required to maintain detailed records, every student visit, every medication administered, every significant health incident. Leo's collapse would certainly be documented in detail, but what about the period leading up to it? Had Carlson sent other children with known medical issues back to practice prematurely? Had Leo himself reported minor issues on previous occasions that weren't properly documented or escalated? Accessing those official logs directly was impossible without triggering suspicion. However, Mrs. Davison, despite her careful wording on the phone, had seemed genuinely concerned about Leo. Constrained perhaps by school politics or loyalty, but fundamentally dedicated to student health. Maybe she could be an inadvertent ally if approached with subtlety. I formulated a plan. I scheduled a follow-up meeting with Mrs. Davison a couple of days later, framing it as wanting to discuss Leo's gradual return to practice and review his asthma action plan again to ensure everyone was on the same page. During the meeting, I kept the tone collaborative, expressing gratitude for her care during the collapse. As she pulled up Leo's electronic file on her computer, I casually steered the conversation towards Coach Carlson's intense coaching style, mentioning offhand that I'd heard some other parents express concerns about the demanding drills. I spoke generally about the pressure middle school kids feel not to complain or appear weak, even when they might be struggling physically. Mrs. Davison listened intently, her expression remaining carefully neutral, professional, but I saw a flicker of something, understanding, agreement, in her eyes before she focused back on the screen. While she was navigating Leo's file, discussing follow-up steps, I deliberately, clumsily, accidentally knocked a small pile of unrelated flyers and papers off the corner of her cluttered desk onto the floor near my chair. As we both bent down simultaneously to pick them up, my eyes scanned her desk quickly. My heart gave a jolt. Partially obscured by a phone charger was a simple 3-ring binder labeled Coach Referrals and Follow-Up. It wasn't an official medical log, clearly something more informal for her own tracking. Later, as the meeting concluded and I was preparing to leave, I feigned forgetting my water bottle. I popped back into her office just as she was attending to another student who had appeared at the counter with a scraped knee. While her attention was diverted for those crucial few seconds, I moved back towards her desk as if retrieving the bottle and managed to quickly, silently flip through about half of the Coach Referrals binder. It wasn't a log of her detailed medical actions, but rather a less formal, chronological internal tracking sheet where she noted students sent to her by coaches, the date, the coach's name, the student's brief complaint, and a one-line note on the outcome. Rest 10 min, return to practice, ice pack applied, monitor, contacted parent. What I saw in that fleeting glimpse confirmed my deepest fears and suspicions. Multiple entries over the past couple of months noted students, including Leo on 2 previous occasions, citing minor wheezing, being sent back to Carlson's practice after only brief checks, sometimes with just that vague note, monitor. Crucially, there were several entries concerning other students with known conditions clearly marked on their files. Another boy identified as asthmatic, a girl noted as diabetic, also sent back to demanding drills with minimal intervention documented. Equally telling was the glaring lack of entries corresponding to specific dates. Leo had told me he'd felt unwell at practice, but hadn't wanted to bother the nurse or face Carlson's impatience. It strongly suggested Carlson wasn't consistently sending strugglings to the nurse as required by school protocol, choosing instead to make his own unqualified judgments on the court. Taking photos was far too risky and potentially illegal. Instead, I burned key dates, the pattern of brief checks, and the names of the other affected students, names I wouldn't use publicly but which demonstrated a pattern, into my memory. It wasn't perfect, legally admissible evidence, but it painted a damning picture of systemic neglect, a pattern of minimizing or ignoring medical concerns to maximize practice time and enforce Carlson's toughness doctrine. The next step was to leverage this fragmented information strategically. I couldn't directly accuse Mrs. Davison of inadequate record-keeping or Carlson of negligence based on a clandestine glimpse of an informal log, but I could weaponize the absence of detailed official records. That evening, I drafted a carefully worded email to Mrs. Davison, making sure to CC Principal Harrison. I began by sincerely thanking her again for her prompt and professional care during Leo's collapse. I then stated that, following Dr. Ramirez's strong recommendation, we were undertaking a thorough review of Leo's asthma management protocols within the school environment to prevent future incidents. To that end, I formally requested copies of all official log entries pertaining to Leo visiting her office for any asthma-related issues during the current basketball season. I specifically asked for documentation, including dates he might have been sent to her by Coach Carlson, details of the assessments performed, any treatments administered, like inhaler use, and any documented communication back to the coach regarding his fitness to return to practice. I knew the official logs might be sparse, especially concerning referrals from Carlson if he wasn't consistently sending Leo as required. Requesting these official records formally would either expose the lack of proper documentation, a form of negligence in itself, violating school policy, or force them to acknowledge minor incidents they might prefer to downplay or had failed to record properly. As a final touch, I subtly slipped in a sentence mentioning my understanding from the school handbook that coaches were required to formally log all referrals to her office for medical checks, putting them on notice that I was aware of the expected procedures. The response, when it came a day later, was revealing. Mrs. Davison replied politely and professionally via email, attaching the detailed record for the collapse incident itself and one other minor visit earlier in the season where Leo had self-presented for his inhaler. However, she stated clearly that there were no other other documented instances of Coach Carlson sending Leo to her office for assessment during the season. Principal Harrison replied separately, briefly, reiterating that the collapse incident had been thoroughly addressed and expressing his continued confidence in the school's established health and safety procedures. The official lack of documentation for the other times Leo had felt unwell and likely should have been sent to the nurse, or perhaps was sent but not logged, combined with the glimpse I'd had of the informal coach referrals log showing previous minor incidents being downplayed, significantly strengthened my case internally. Even if it wasn't courtroom-ready proof, it demonstrated a system prone to ignoring or failing to document minor issues, creating the conditions that allowed a major medical event like Leo's collapse to occur. Knowing the internal system was fundamentally flawed, defensive, and resistant to acknowledging error, I realized my focus had to shift outward. I needed external pressure. I needed allies. I needed other parents. Surely Leo couldn't be the only child struggling under Carlson's tough love regime, especially among those with underlying health conditions. I decided to start making quiet, discreet inquiries, testing the waters. I reached out first via text to Sarah Jenkins, no relation to the PI in the other story, the mother of Leo's teammate and friend, Jamal, who I knew also had mild, generally well-controlled asthma. I kept the initial approach casual, checking in after Leo's incident, asking how Jamal was finding the intensity of Carlson's practices. Had Jamal had any issues with his asthma this season? Sarah's initial replies were cautious, non-committal, but when I shared, honestly, the details of Leo's collapse, Carlson's reaction, gutted out, and Principal Harrison's dismissive, overprotective response, her tone changed immediately. She admitted, her frustration evident even via text, that Jamal had come home from practice completely wiped out, sometimes audibly wheezing on more than one occasion. He'd mentioned Carlson telling him to breathe through it or take a knee for a minute, instead of using his inhaler right away. Sarah confessed she'd been worried, angry even, but hadn't wanted to make waves, fearful of labeling Jamal as weak or jeopardizing his spot on the team Carlson clearly favored. My story validated her concerns and ignited her anger. She wasn't alone. Together, Sarah and I became a quiet investigative team. We started systematically contacting other parents on the team we knew personally or felt might be sympathetic, prioritizing those whose children had any known health issues, allergies requiring EpiPens, diabetes, Osgood-Schlatter disease, even just recent injuries. We met for coffee during the day, made hushed phone calls in the evenings, after kids were in bed, shared our stories, listened intently. A disturbing pattern quickly emerged. Another parent, Mark's dad, revealed with considerable agitation that Mark, a type 1 diabetic, had felt his blood sugar dropping dangerously low during particularly intense, extended conditioning drills, but was hesitant to stop and test because Carlson had previously benched another player for taking what the coach deemed an excessively long water break. Mark had ended up treating a near hypoglycemic event discreetly on the sidelines, terrified of drawing Carlson's ire. A third parent, Emily's mom, recounted how her daughter, who suffered from exercise-induced migraines, had been pointedly told by Carlson to stop faking it and get back on the line when she complained of a blinding headache starting during sprints. The common thread was fear. Fear of retribution from the coach, fear of being labeled soft or a complainer, fear of jeopardizing coveted playing time. This fear kept both the kids and their parents silent, suffering through potentially dangerous situations. Our individual concerns, initially dismissed by the administration as isolated instances of overprotective parenting, coalesced into a powerful, shared narrative. A coach prioritizing winning and perceived toughness over documented medical needs and basic student well-being, enabled by an administration that looked the other way. We formed a small, determined core group of 4 families. We met secretly at Sarah's house one evening, spreading our notes and experiences across her kitchen table. We knew complaining individually to Harrison was futile. We decided the necessary next step was a direct, public confrontation, not with the principal, but with the ultimate authority, the school district administration, at their next official public board meeting. We needed to bypass the resistant school level and appeal to the elected officials and district superintendent. Armed now with our collective experiences, documented patterns, and shared outrage, we strategized meticulously. We wouldn't just show up and vent. We would present a formal, evidence-based case. We needed to be organized, factual, and undeniable. Central to maximizing the impact of our case was securing expert medical opinion. My word, even bolstered by the other parents' anecdotal accounts, could still potentially be framed by the district as overly emotional parental concern. We needed objective, unimpeachable medical authority to validate the seriousness of our claims. I scheduled an urgent appointment with Dr. Ramirez, Leo's pediatrician, bringing Leo along so she could assess him post-collapse. I laid out the entire sequence of events again, this time including the corroborating stories from Sarah, Mark's dad, and Emily's mom, highlighting the pattern of disregard for various documented medical conditions under Carlson's coaching. Dr. Ramirez listened intently, her expression shifting from professional concern to visible anger as I recounted Harrison's tough love defense and the other parents' experiences. She reviewed Leo's chart again, noting the severity of the collapse incident requiring nebulizer treatment. She pulled up the official, signed asthma action plan we had filed with the school nurse at the beginning of the season. "This is medically indefensible," she stated firmly, her voice tight with indignation. "Ignoring a documented action plan, actively discouraging an asthmatic child from using his rescue inhaler, telling him to push through significant symptoms. That's not tough love, that is unambiguous medical negligence. It could easily have been catastrophic." She didn't hesitate when I asked if she would be willing to formalize her opinion. She readily agreed to write a strongly worded formal letter outlining the physiological dangers of Carlson's reported methods, the critical importance of strict adherence to asthma asthma action plans, and unequivocally condemning any coaching philosophy that encourages young athletes to ignore clear physiological distress signals, especially those with known, documented medical conditions. Her powerful letter, printed on official clinic letterhead and signed, became the authoritative cornerstone of our presentation to the board. Our newly formed parent group worked collaboratively and intensely over the next week to prepare for the district meeting. Sarah took the lead in gathering anonymized, concise, written statements from the other concerned parents, ensuring they detailed specific incidents, dates, and the coach's responses. Mark's dad prepared a clear, factual summary of standard diabetic protocols for student athletes, highlighting the immediate risks associated with ignoring hypoglycemic symptoms during intense exertion. I compiled a detailed timeline of events specifically concerning Leo, carefully including the documented lack of official nurse log entries for minor incidents, Harrison's dismissive email responses, and most importantly, the full text of Dr. Ramirez's powerful letter. We made enough copies of the complete packet: my timeline, Dr. Ramirez's letter, the anonymized parent statements, the diabetes protocol summary for every board member, the superintendent, and key district staff likely to be present. We assigned specific speaking roles for the public comment period, deciding I would lead off with Leo's story and Dr. Ramirez's condemnation, followed by Sarah presenting the pattern of experiences from other families, and Mark's dad providing the specific context on diabetes risks. We rehearsed our brief, 3-minute statements meticulously, aiming for a tone that was informed, unified, resolute, and deeply concerned, rather than purely emotional or accusatory. As a final strategic step, we collectively decided to alert the local newspaper's education reporter, someone known for thorough coverage of district issues. We provided her with a brief, factual summary of our core concerns about coaching practices and student safety protocols at the middle school, mentioning our plan to formally address the district board at the upcoming meeting. We wanted public awareness, another layer of pressure on the administration, ensuring our concerns couldn't be easily swept under the rug after the meeting. The night of the district board meeting arrived, charged with nervous energy. The boardroom, usually sparsely populated, was noticeably more crowded than usual. Word had clearly spread through school networks and perhaps from the reporters' inquiries. Our group of parents sat together near the front, a visible, unified block, clutching our prepared statements and document packets. When the public comment period finally opened after tedious procedural reports, I went first as planned. Walking to the podium, my hands trembled slightly, but my voice felt steady. I calmly, factually recounted the events leading to Leo's collapse, emphasizing the documented asthma action plan that was ignored. I read key damning excerpts from Dr. Ramirez's letter, her medical authority silencing the room as she condemned the coach's methods as negligent and potentially catastrophic. I concluded by referencing the disturbing lack of proper documentation for medical checks initiated by the coach, suggesting a systemic issue. Then Sarah stepped up, her voice equally firm, sharing Jamal's experiences and reading powerful anonymized statements from other parents, clearly highlighting a dangerous pattern of disregard for various documented health conditions under Carlson's leadership. Mark's dad followed, presenting the clear medical information on diabetes management in athletes and the specific risks Carlson's alleged practices posed. As he finished, we formally presented our comprehensive packet of documentation to the board clerk for official distribution to all board members and the superintendent. The impact in the room was immediate and undeniable. The board members, some of whom had initially looked bored or distracted by the preceding reports, sat up straighter, their expressions shifting from routine attentiveness to visible concern, several frowning deeply as they scanned Dr. Ramirez's letter. The district superintendent, seated beside the board, listened intently, his face growing increasingly grim. The local reporter, positioned strategically nearby, was scribbling notes furiously in her notepad. When we finished our coordinated presentation, a tense, uncomfortable silence filled the room. The board president cleared his throat, thanked us for bringing these serious matters forward, his tone markedly more serious than usual. He assured us, and the assembled audience, that the board took matters of student health and safety extremely seriously, and pledged a full, immediate investigation into the coaching practices, administrative oversight, and health protocol adherence at the middle school, involving coaches, administration, and nursing staff. He publicly directed the superintendent to oversee the investigation personally and report back with detailed findings and concrete recommendations at the very next scheduled board meeting. The public outcry we had strategically aimed for followed swiftly and decisively. The local newspaper ran a prominent story the very next day, headlined, "Parents Raise Serious Safety Concerns Over Middle School Coaching Practices," accurately quoting excerpts from Dr. Ramirez's letter, which she had given permission to share, and summarizing our statements to the board. The article sparked immediate discussion on local online forums and social media groups. Other parents, previously hesitant or unaware, started sharing their own concerning stories and experiences, not just about Coach Carlson, but about other instances across different sports and schools where they felt student well-being was potentially being compromised for athletic performance or the school's image. The narrative shifted definitively and publicly. We were no longer isolated, overprotective parents. We were seen as courageous advocates fighting a system that had demonstrably failed to protect vulnerable children. Principal Harrison and Coach Carlson found themselves squarely under an intense, uncomfortable public spotlight. The district investigation, spurred by the public pressure and the board's directive, was swift, thorough, and, from what we gathered through informal channels, quite rigorous. Investigators interviewed numerous parents, including our core group, students, always with parental consent and presence, Mrs. Davison, who reportedly cooperated fully, Principal Harrison, and Coach Carlson himself. Dr. Ramirez provided further medical context and clarification to the investigators. The findings, presented publicly by the superintendent at the next packed board meeting, fully corroborated our group's concerns. The investigation officially confirmed that Coach Carlson had repeatedly failed to follow documented medical action plans for multiple students, had actively discouraged players from reporting symptoms or seeking help from the nurse, and had failed to consistently refer students for necessary medical checks as required by district policy. Furthermore, it found that Principal Harrison had failed to adequately investigate the initial complaints brought to his attention and had inadvertently fostered a coaching culture where subjective interpretations of toughness were prioritized over established, objective safety protocols. The consequences, announced immediately following the report, were decisive and impactful. The board announced that Coach Carlson was immediately and indefinitely suspended from all coaching duties, pending further review and completion of mandatory, intensive retraining on student health and safety protocols. He was later quietly reassigned to a non-coaching, classroom-based position within the district. Principal Harrison received a formal, documented reprimand placed in his personnel file and was required by the board to immediately implement new, stricter oversight procedures for all athletic programs at the middle school. These included mandatory, annual coach training specifically on managing student health conditions, clearer, non-retaliatory reporting lines for student and parent health concerns, and regular independent audits of coaching compliance with medical action plans and nurse referral logs. Significantly, the district also committed to implementing revised system-wide health and safety protocols for all extracurricular activities, with specific, detailed emphasis on managing chronic conditions like asthma, diabetes, allergies, and concussion protocols. Seeing those concrete changes enacted, knowing that Coach Carlson was no longer in a position to endanger students through negligence or misplaced notions of toughness, felt like a monumental, hard-won victory. It wasn't just about protecting Leo anymore. It was about ensuring the safety of all the kids whose health had been disregarded or minimized. Leo returned to the basketball team the following season, albeit with some initial trepidation. The new coach, a younger woman with a background in sports physiology, met with us before the season started, meticulously reviewed Leo's asthma action plan, asked clarifying questions, and established clear communication protocols. Leo played cautiously at first, hyper-aware of his breathing, but gradually regained his confidence on the court, knowing his health was understood, respected, and no longer viewed as an inconvenience or a sign of weakness. His rescue inhaler remained unused on the sidelines most days, but its presence, readily available and acknowledged by his new coach, provided immense peace of mind. The fight undoubtedly took a toll. It consumed weeks of energy, caused significant stress, strained some relationships at the school temporarily, and created unavoidable awkwardness. But standing together with the other determined parents, meticulously building our case, refusing to be dismissed or intimidated, it was also incredibly empowering. We had challenged a resistant system, demanded accountability from those in charge, and ultimately forced meaningful change. Most importantly, we had protected our children from further harm. Watching Leo run freely down the court during practice, breathing easily, fully participating, his inhaler unused but respected, I knew with absolute certainty that we had done the right thing. My overprotective concerns hadn't been overprotective at all. They had been essential, life-saving advocacy. The school system had failed Leo, but we, his parents, and the small community of allies we rallied had not. We had fought for his safety, and in doing so, inadvertently made the system safer for countless other students. That hard-won knowledge was, and remains, its own profound reward.